Ladies and gentlemen, we have done it. This is what collecting is all about. What's up, guys? Joe R, Vintage Pokemon. We've got an amazing set of cards to take a look at here. I am so excited because we've acquired a card that I have been chasing after for a long, long time. Really, two cards that I have been wanting to add to my collection for an extraordinarily long time. And it only took the biggest trade of my entire life in order to make this actually happen. So, you know, no big deal. No big deal there. So, I mean, obviously, the creme de la creme of this trade that I made was this first edition base set Charizard. And if you want to see the actual conversation and discussion about this trade with my friend who we did this trade with, the real Randy Chavez, you could see that in the link above. I'll post that there for you guys. But you could check out his channel. He does all things Omi, Earth 2, Tesla, Pokemon. He does a whole range of stuff, but really cool, chill guy. But we did this trade with him for this first edition BGS 9 Charizard, as well as this PSA 9 first edition Neo Genesis Lugia. And all it took for me to get these two cards was my first edition Neo Genesis booster box, which is in definitely what I would consider a near mint to mint condition box. I think like one corner is like maybe a teeny bit dinged, but otherwise it is a just incredibly clean box. And we checked it out all around, and it is, for all intents purposes, it is a very real box. We are pretty sure of the authentication on it. We checked out all the things that would be necessary to look for to know that it's real. And I think one of the most important things is that it's old. You know, I got this a long time ago, really before, you know, faking boxes was even really a question. So it's a really great trade for me, I think, and a really great trade for him as well. But I want to talk about it a little bit with you guys. But first, let me show you this beautiful BGS 9 first edition Charizard, because, I mean, this thing is freaking gorgeous. You can see, first off, the subgrades on this are a whopping 9 for centering, 9 for edges, 9.5 for corners, and 9.5 for surface. And honestly, I think the most important subgrade on here is that surface, because I care a lot about the surface of my first edition cards being as clean as humanly possible. And this one is just absolutely fantastic. I mean, you take a look at that front hollow pattern there, and I honestly could not tell you why it is a 9.5 versus a 10 for the surface. I couldn't tell you in a lot of cases why it would be a 9 versus a 9.5 either. I think those 0.5 subgrades, sometimes they're such a small difference between them. You would, in many cases, need to take the card out of the case, take a magnifying glass to it, and just hunt for what could be the reason for why it doesn't get a 10 versus a 9.5. But, I mean, all things considered, this is a really strong BGS 9 first edition base set Charizard. And on top of that, it is a thick stamp first edition base set Charizard. And I don't want to get too much into the differences between a thick stamp and a thin stamp, but if you take a look at the video above, I have a video where I actually go over what makes a thick stamp versus a thin stamp, as well as sample videos about that as well. So a gorgeous card that we have here. And if you've seen my videos before, you'll know that I actually don't collect BGS cards. So this is the only BGS card in my entire collection. But when it came down to it, what was I going to give up my first edition Neo Genesis booster box for? And I actually had another offer for a PSA 9 first edition base set Charizard. When it comes down to it, for a card like this, you have to really look at it yourself. Not just what the grade is, but what are you getting? What card is it that you're receiving in that deal specifically? And when I looked at this card, it was just such a strong BGS 9 that I felt like it was the best option for this trade. It's just such a beautiful card. I mean, the centering is a 9, and I've seen centering worse than this on 9 cards, both PSA and BGS. So, I mean, I've got no problem with that centering. The edges, if you take a look, you're not going to notice anything on the front. The front looks really nice. But if you take a look at the back, take a look at the edges on the back of this card. We'll start in this top left corner here. and we'll kind of go around the card, you can see it is extremely clean. I don't see any whitening at all on this card. And I think in a lot of cases, a card this clean with no white dots at all normally would get a 9.5 in my personal opinion. I mean, it's that clean. You take a look, you know, you get up real close, try not to make it blur. It's this top right corner here where there seems to be like the slightest little bit of chipping. I mean, it is so incredibly minute in comparison to other PSA 9 cards that I have seen. And this is a lot less whitening than I've seen typically from BGS 9 cards. I mean, I've seen BGS 9s where there's a little bit of whitening in a couple spots and it still gets the 9. So, I mean, this is a really clean backside and the corners were all sharp on it. So I think that was really wonderful too, is that the corners got the 9.5. So taking a look at this card in consideration with what the edges look like, what the front looks like, what the centering looks like, and on top of that, it's a thick stamp first edition base set Charizard. I mean, it seemed like a no-brainer to me. I mean, it was stronger than most PSA 9s that I've seen before. So I have no problem with this particular card being added to my collection. I just think it is a beautiful card to have, even though it's the only BGS 9 in my entire collection. I prefer PSA 9s, but it just seemed like a no-brainer, like I said. And the other part of the deal was this Lugia, and not to take away from Charizard, well, not to take away from Lugia, really, but, I mean, it's got a gorgeous swirl. It's not Charizard level status, but it is the Charizard of the second generation, the rookie card of the second generation, and you take a look at it, and it's got a gorgeous swirl right there. I mean, look at that thing. That is some beautiful placement. And it suffers from the same problem that all Lugias tend to suffer from, and that is that it does have a factory line on the front, which I think I can get on camera. Maybe. It should be right around, there we go. You can see it right there. It's horizontal, it's very, very faint, but it goes across the bottom part of the card. And that is what keeps a lot of Lugias from getting the PSA 10 is they've got like one factory line somewhere. And this is definitely an upgrade from my PSA 8, which has, I think, multiple factory lines and even a couple scratches on it. So I'm really happy to have this card added to my collection. And just like a lot of Lugias that are PSA 8 or PSA 9, the backside is extremely clean. I mean, there's not a single spot of back edge whitening, and the corners are all sharp. So it is literally always just the surface of this card that is problematic sometimes. And that's a really common problem with Neo Genesis as it is. So some people might be wondering, okay, was this a good deal in the grand scheme of things for these particular two cards? A first edition Neo Genesis booster box, which I'm holding on to for my buddy in the meantime. But is this a good trade for me and him? And I would say that when it comes to trades, sometimes it's not about having exact value to begin with, but I would say this one is pretty well evened out. We have to think about how the value has been kind of going all over the place, and how value right in this instant, I don't think is the most important thing to begin with. This Charizard was valued at in excess of $50,000 last November. I think it was purchased for around $60,000, not including tax. And the price of BGS 9 and PSA 9 Charizards has dropped considerably by about half that margin. Still a huge increase from early 2019, but it's dropped since last October, November by a considerable margin. And the Lugia too has also dropped a considerable amount since then. But as things go down, they're also going to go back up. And so you look at this card, this is a very nostalgic card. And this box is a very nostalgic box. The value of this box has held pretty firm. It was like half the price of this card last October. Now they're pretty evened out. This box has been going for around $30,000 to $35,000. So you got a card that currently in this market is worth somewhere around, it's a thick stamp, so I would give that a little bit of a premium. given that there's only about 25%, this is an estimate of course, there's only about 25% thick stamps to thin stamps in base set first edition, but looking at the condition of the card, it being a thick stamp, I'd put it at around $30,000 evaluation on today's market. Maybe a little less. The Lugia is right around the $3,000 to $4,000 mark by comparison. So you take that and the box value, which is around 30, 35, it's not that bad a trade. It's pretty even, I would say. And the box is only going to go up. It's a sealed box. There's only ever going to be less of them. Whereas you're always going to have an increasing amount of these cards, not by a considerable margin, of course. It's going to be definitely slowing down by a large amount. But just looking at the scarcity of everything in consideration, I think it's only fair to say value across the board is going to go up with time. Now, which one is going to end up being more in the long run? Only time's going to tell. But I think right now it's a very good trade. And thinking about what I wanted, I think when I originally bought this box, it was around 2014, and I paid an now incredible $750 for it. And at the time, I was kind of thinking, like, these two things were really similar in value. A PSA 9 Charizard was around the same price as this box at that point. And it's funny that they still are pretty similar in value now, but I was kind of thinking at the time, you know, do I want to get one card, or do I want to get a box and open it and have many cards? And definitely my viewpoint, my priorities have changed, because as the box got more and more expensive, I kind of said to myself, wow, this would be really dangerous for me to open, but do I really want to have just this box for my collection, or would I prefer the card now? Because it got to the point where I wasn't going to open it anymore. And I kind of said to myself that I really would have preferred to have the Charizard at this point. So that was kind of the driving factor, not to mention getting high grade Neo Genesis cards out of a box is not a guarantee. I mean, Lugia is the perfect example of this. You could pull a mint condition Lugia from this box, and it's going to grade an 8 because of the factory lines that are notorious for being on it. Same problems exist with a lot of other big hitters in the box. T17, Slow King, a lot of them have those factory lines. And so I think this was something that made me really comfortable with that trade, because I was getting a card that I really was hoping to potentially pull from that box in one of the highest grades that you could possibly get for it. So I was just over the moon to do this trade with one of my best friends from when we were really young, and couldn't be happier with it. It got thick stamp, gorgeous BGS 9, first edition Charizard. And really my only problem with this card isn't even with the card. It's actually with the case, because it's a little bit older of a case. It's got a couple scratches on it, but that's not the card. That's the case. The card is what it is. I mean, it's a beautiful mint condition first edition base set Charizard. I've now had the 7 at one point. I've had the PSA 8 at one point, and now I've got the BGS 9. And I think it would easily cross over to a PSA 9 if I so desired. I think it's really obvious that that would be the case. But I think with these subgrades, it definitely gives it a nice added flair. It's telling us about the condition of this card and how strong it really is. So, I don't know. I think for now, I'll keep it in this case. I'd love to fix up some of the scratches on the case, but I love it the way it sits. It's also not labeled as a thick or thin stamp, because I think this might have been either before or right as they started labeling cases. But I don't really mind that either, because you know what? BGS tends to mess up the thick stamp labeling. You'll see a lot of cards on the market, which I think novice collectors of Pokemon should be really careful about, because a lot of times BGS gets it wrong. They label the first edition base set cards as thick stamps when they're actually thin stamps by accident, which again, if you're concerned about making such a mistake, you want to see why this is a thick stamp, you can definitely check out the video that I have linked above earlier in the video, because it's as clear as day. Once you know the difference, you will never mix it up again if you have the card in front of your face. But we could take a look at that stamp real quick, actually. And it's a nice thick stamp, because the 1 is much thicker across than other thin stamp first edition cards, which if you take a look at this Lugia here, And again, you can take a look at this Lugia. That number 1 is very thin across. It's not as thick as the Charizard is. But beautiful set of cards. And folks, if you love this kind of vintage content, I do nothing but this. Like and subscribe to my channel, Joe R Vintage Pokemon. All I do is take a look at first edition Pokemon cards, either or unlimited too. But the point is, it's all Wizards of the Coast. It's all vintage all the time. It's all I love talking about. It's all I love collecting. That's my shtick. So make sure you tune in for more great content, and we'll make sure to keep this box nice and safe for my good friend, the real Randy Chavez. Make sure you again check his channel out, because he's a really cool guy, and he's a straight shooter. Keeps it real. So anyway, I'll see you guys all later. Tune in next time. Bye-bye.